everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. There's a lot going on right now in the world, politically, across the world, and there's a lot going on in our personal lives. I don't know about you, but I am swamped getting Christmas cards out, events planned, presents bought, and treats made. It's a lot going on. But one thing I hope that we take the time to do this year, especially at this time of the year, is spend time with our family and friends, maybe even the ones that have had some relationship strains over the last several years. This week on the George Collection, I wanted to read an article from February of 1999, but it might as well have been written today because it pretty much highlights exactly how a lot of us are feeling. It's actually a book review by a man named Stanley Crouch about a book called Ex-Friends. As I'm reading this article today, I want you all to put yourself in the author's shoes, which, as of today, is not a difficult thing to do. But also keep in mind, the JFK Jr. was the editor-in-chief of this magazine that published this article. And put yourself in JFK Jr.'s shoes when he read this and chose to publish it. Let's read. The article is called "The Man Who Lost His Friends." Norman Podhoretz was one of the left's brightest lights until he decided that his comrades hated America. Now in his new memoir, Ex-Friends, Podhoretz is dishing dirt on all the liberals he's washed his hands of. Norman Podhoretz was born in 1930. Though his career has crossed the fields of literary criticism, magazine editing, and politics, in most Manhattan circles, he is considered an attack dog who betrayed New York liberal intellectual life to become a barker and biter for the right wing. That is because he turned Commentary magazine conservative, and in 1979 published Breaking Ranks, a combative memoir. Though Podhoretz may well bark with brittle lyricism and absolute contempt, he plants his teeth with more than a little accuracy. This is especially true when he is zeroing in on liberal left hypocrisies. So, as one who has no allegiance to either the left or the right, but finds himself most involved in the question of what gets in the way of understanding and elevating American culture, I felt neither for nor against the man when I accepted this assignment, which was to size up Podhoretz and his new book, Ex-Friends. Upon meeting Podhoretz at the Oyster Bar in New York's Grand Central Terminal, I had a number of conversation topics in mind. Most of them were focused on the fact that his book is essentially about the more than 40 years of arguments and fallings out he has had with New York Jewish intellectuals over politics, art, and culture. Podhoretz, a small, aggressive, witty, learned, and contemplative man, is quick to say it wasn't always Jews. But the truth remains that, with only a few brief digressions, the people he chose to write about are Jews: Allen Ginsberg, Lionel and Diana Trilling, Lillian Hellman, Hannah Arendt, and Norman Mailer. These people gave heat to the cauldron of intellectual engagement that Podhoretz plunged into in 1946, just after World War II, when he enrolled at Columbia University. But as Ex-Friends makes clear through its depiction of individuals who diverge substantially in attitudes and personalities, quote, Jewish, like any other ethnic characterization, doesn't really describe the car itself, but the factory from which it comes. Reared poor in Brooklyn, and, he reports with glee, considered to be quite gifted, Podhoretz studied under Lionel Trilling, whom he and others regarded as the dean of American literary criticism. When I went to Columbia, even though it was never mentioned, there was a 17% quota for Jews, Podhoretz recalls. I didn't know it then, and I had other things on my mind. I didn't need to have my own background reiterated and deified the way people feel they must today. I thought of Columbia as a place where I was being supplied with the keys to this magnificent kingdom of art and ideas. It was only later that I evolved from someone with sympathy toward the left to someone who felt contempt, you could even say a hatred, of everything that it stood for. All the lies that were so conveniently masked by various causes that could be traced to totalitarianism. In Ex-Friends, Podhoretz traces what is familiar ground to those who have followed his work, but this time, with an admirable range of feeling, he has fashioned a political version of Hemingway's A Movable Feast, in which the story of a period is told through the writer's relationships with a handful of people. Each person represents a tendency or a succession of tendencies, as does the author himself. He or she becomes an embodiment of something that was not only in the air, but had been brought to the pages of magazines and books. The intellectuals he fell in with were, Podhoretz says, alienated from society in everything possible, from politics to sex. A lot of energy was there, and a passion that was not always pleasant but could, in retrospect, be seen as a lot of fun. I mean, as I point out in one incident in the book, Who would imagine someone challenging a man to a duel over a point of intellectual honor? That would be impossible now, but it was more than possible then. It was true. When I ask him about the lack of Negroes in the book, Podhoretz says, I could have included Jimmy Baldwin, whom I knew, but not that well. I think he did his best work before he fell in line with those who hated America, which he obviously didn't in his early writing. In fact, friends and I were arguing in the late 40s when his work started to appear as to whether he was black. You couldn't tell, and he didn't intend for you to be able to tell. He wanted to be recognized as a writer first. His problem was that he couldn't sort out where what mattered to him was black and where it was homosexual. The book actually suggests that Podhoretz probably knew Baldwin much better than he knew Ginsberg. So, Ex-Friends is another unfortunate example of how segregated our world is, even when questions about the nature of America and its struggles are at the center of the discussion. This is where Podhoretz, like so many white intellectuals, parts company with scholar Constant Rourke, who argued that the essential American character is part Yankee, part Indian, part frontiersman, and part Negro. This has never been more important to those who view black people as no more than social problems or victims or models of protest against racism. Jewish musicians have long understood this truth with far greater depth than Jewish intellectuals. No Jewish writer's work even approximates the all-American understanding of Negroes made obvious in the work of George Gershwin and Harold Arlen. When I tell Podhoretz that Ralph Ellison once observed to me that the whites in the intellectual circles described in Ex-Friends knew little about Negroes, other than what they gleaned from statistics, public speeches, and television, he defends himself by saying that he used to go to restaurants and jazz clubs in Harlem until it became unwelcoming, by which term he alludes to the hostile atmosphere that a number of whites recalled experiencing during the black nationalist phase of the late 60s. Ex-Friends is itself a description of one unwelcoming after another. We are given another Podhoretz version of the rise of the Jewish intellectual and of the fights that came about as the social attitudes that developed in the 30s mutated during the Cold War 50s and into the 60s, when the idea of revitalizing the country was supplanted by the idea of revolution. Yet no matter how self-serving Podhoretz's angle may be, his self-criticism and attention to the details of issues reaffirm that this business of making sense of America has always been a serious undertaking. His insights about Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, and how those men were defended, apologized for, and promoted, seems inarguable. This is equally true of what he says about how Hollywood became willing to embrace almost anyone who hated the country, even to the point of apologizing for murderers. That sounds familiar. The idea to begin his series of portraits and arguments with Ginsberg and to end it with Mailer is particularly intelligent. Having these two artistic figures frame everything shows, knowingly or not, how both Podhoretz's and their narcissism intersected at significant points. Given Podhoretz's eloquent understandings of what bad cultural influences they were and why each failed to realize his talent, nothing he says about either of them is wrong. Podhoretz, while softly growling about certain shortcomings of the right, only bares his teeth in the other direction. Neither extreme in our society is without sin, and both are deserving of the fangs any attack dog worth his bark can deliver. Obviously, through the words of this article, we know that Podhoretz was awake. He called out a certain group of people, and he called out a certain place in America that has a lot of influence, Hollywood. And I think it's just interesting that this has been out since February of 1999. Also, what happened in 1999 later on, in July to be exact, it's got Ronald Reagan on the cover. And then at the very bottom it says, the top 10 most conniving politicians. I think I might read that one here soon. But it features another article on the cover that I've read before about Rupert Murdoch. And that article is a really good one too. It highlights a lot about Murdoch that a lot of people don't know. And it talks about his goal, which is a new global empire. As you go back to your hometowns or host people for your holiday dinners, I hope that we can turn some of our ex-friends into friends again and put some of our differences to the side, find some empathy towards each other, and really start to unify our country. And I think it happens over dinner tables. It doesn't happen on a grander scale. It happens over the dinner table. I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas. I hope you turn some of your ex-friends into friends again. And that does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
of this extraordinary magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, I mean, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.